GEM International is a new diamond explorer in the richest diamond-producing country in Africa, located next to the fourth largest producing diamond mine in the world. International Spotlight is on an 1109-carat diamond recently discovered in Africa by a fellow Canadian junior with a proven operator and finance team. GEM International trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol GI. Visit us at gemdiamondmining.com.
I'm Larry Ray, President and CEO of American Manganese Inc., listed on the TSX Venture, ticker symbol AMY, A-M-Y, with proprietary patents in the U.S., China, and South Africa. Our focus is on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. China recently legislated the responsibility for recycling onto their electric vehicle manufacturers and importers. For more information, please visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is James Corbett, publisher of theCorbettReport.com and editorial writer for the International Forecaster. Welcome back to the show, James.
Thank you for having me back. It's a pleasure to be here as always.
Japan just had an election. Any shock that the Prime Minister was reelected?
It's really not a shock, if for no other reason than the overwhelming response of the Japanese public on the issue of who to vote for in this recent election in the upper house was, well, who else is there to vote for? The opposition is just scattered and is not particularly strong right now. There's no clear leader that has rallied the Japanese public. So just out of a sense of stability in times of chaos, the Japanese public has once again gone with the ruling party that has been in power for almost the entirety of the post-World War II era. So I don't think it was really a surprise that the Abe government has won handily in the upper house elections. But that, of course, also gave the Abe coalition that is in charge of the parliament right now a supermajority, the supermajority that it needs in order to do things like make constitutional revisions. So the stated goal of amending the Constitution or changing the Constitution to either abolish the Article 9 peace clause or to amend it certainly has gone ahead, and it's very likely that in the coming years we will see a push by the Abe government to do that and to convert the Japanese so-called quote-unquote self-defense force into an active, fully operational military.
Some people in the West have said it's time Japan played a bigger role in its defense. Is that really the feeling of the people there?
I'm not sure that reflects the feeling of the average person in Japan, but there is certainly a growing and very rabid nationalist, militarist, imperialist base that the Abe government plays on, and that is their core, that is energized and emboldened by recent events, including, of course, the growing militarization of China and Chinese encroachment in the East China Sea, the fact that Japan is year after year scrambling record numbers of fighters to intercept Chinese aircraft that have traveled over Japanese airspace. These types of things are being seen as a growing threat and are energizing at least a certain part of the public towards the idea that they do need a more active military. So that's being played on, and I think the general dis-ease with the public over things like economic concerns spills over into a type of nationalism and a need to direct that energy elsewhere. So I think that plays into it as well. Again, I don't think the average person on the street is so excited about the idea of Japan becoming militaristic again, but it does seem pretty inevitable at this point.
Do the Japanese have a realistic picture of history? Do they know about the real causes of the Second World War? Some Japanese I've talked to wonder why the U.S. dropped atomic bombs on them. They had no idea that Japan had attacked Pearl Harbor first.
Certainly the question of the education in Japan and what it teaches and what it doesn't teach about World War II is a continual sore spot here in East Asia, and you constantly have international diplomatic events and protests about what does or does not get into the Japanese school curriculum. So it is an ongoing concern, and there is definitely the sense that since the Abe government has come into power, it has only gotten worse, and that more of that history of World War II is being excluded from the conversation. So it is certainly a sore point for a lot of people in the East Asia region that feel that Japan is not fully understanding or teaching its responsibility for what happened in World War II, and that again feeds into the Japanese public, to a certain extent, not really understanding the history of why these various places are angry at them, and it feeds into all of the China and Korea and all the other places that Japan was militarily aggressive against, becoming more resentful of that, and is always used as kind of a diplomatic point in negotiations here.
What's the feeling in Japan about the UN court ruling that China is breaking international law by building artificial islands in the South China Sea?
Well, Japan was one of the countries that was supportive of that arbitration. There were a number of countries like Japan, Canada, the United States that were supportive of the idea of that arbitration, that UN, that court operating under the UN law of the sea ruling, having jurisdiction over that dispute. Obviously, China said before and has said since that ruling came down that they would not abide by it, that they did not recognize the jurisdiction of that court, and there were a number of countries supporting them in that. So Japan obviously wanted this arbitration to be definitive because I think it was a foregone conclusion that they were going to conclude that China had overstepped its bounds and would not recognize the so-called 9-dash line that China claims in the South China Sea area, because obviously this plays into what Japan is experiencing with China in the East China Sea and disputes over the Senkaku Islands and other disputed parts of that territory. So it's quite obvious. I think there is a sense that there is a coalition that has been formed, whether by default or by active participation, of countries that feel they are being aggressed upon by China. And I think Japan would be part of that mixture, Philippines obviously being another.
Does China feel any pressure from lower cost markets like Vietnam, where apparently wholesale factory movements are taking place, displacing people in China in favor of workers in Vietnam?
I think so. I think they are starting to feel that pinch, and that's one of the things that's contributing to the overall slowdown of the Chinese economy. I mean, of course, the slowdown in global growth has been a large contributor to that as well. But yes, as China starts to find more and more of its population being pulled out of poverty, that also means that manufacturers are looking for even cheaper markets to go to, and one of those places certainly is Vietnam, and there's even the possibility that as we move forward, places like Myanmar and Cambodia and other places that have not been on the radar before may start to become on the radar as they start to open up more towards international investment. So it is certainly something that China is looking at now, at least as in the long term. Perhaps in the short term, the global growth situation would be more pressing, but it is starting to pinch at the Chinese manufacturing base.
Didn't Adidas close down factories in China so that they can make their running shoes in Germany by robots?
Exactly right, yes. This is, of course, not just a Chinese worry, but now a global worry, is that we are coming to the inflection point where we are going to see more and more manufacturing jobs that previously were not thought to be replaceable being replaced by automation, and that really is coming. And of course, that was the main talking point at Davos this year, talking about the Davos man becoming basically Davos robot, and they were having sessions on that idea. It's certainly something that's being discussed more and more as we move ahead, and that's why even in Switzerland, for example, we saw that recent referendum on the basic income, which was shot down by the Swiss people. But that type of idea is going to be, I think, talked about more and more in the coming years as we look at how we can transition away from a society that requires manual labor to one that really doesn't.
Well, of course, the EU is discussing the possibility of a social tax on robots, classifying them as electronic persons, and I guess that would be to help people displaced by robots.
Well, that would be the ostensible reason for it. I think we can have our cynical ideas about what government is going to do with its tax revenues and why it chooses to implement them. But yes, ostensibly this would be to make sure that the safety net is there. And again, I think ideas like this are going to be floated more and more in the coming years as it becomes apparent that no matter who gets into office in the United States, for example, no matter who takes the Oval Office this November, I don't think there's going to be some sudden and dramatic upswing in American manufacturing activity or in terms of the American economy overall. I think that genie is out of the bottle, and I don't think there's anything that can be done at this point. It is going to be more and more a societal conversation about how do we help people who are being crushed beneath the wheels of this kind of juggernaut that's been unleashed.
Well, something like 50 million Americans have given up looking for work, so that can't be a very promising sign for the future.
No, and in fact, the labor participation rate in the United States has been hovering around record lows for quite a while now, and I think that gives the lie to the idea that there's been some sort of remarkable recovery since the 2008 Lehman crisis. That recovery has been not exclusively, but for the majority, it has been in the sectors of temporary contract work or part-time work, which means that full-time gainful employment has been replaced by temporary jobs that are basically keeping people swinging on the vine. So I think the idea of any sort of fundamental recovery since 2008 is the big lie of our time, and we've been cocooned in that lie because the markets have returned to normal, and there is at least some sense in which employment has returned in the form of this part-time and temporary work that has kept people basically coasting along on that bubble. But that is not sustainable, and the piper is going to be paid for that. And we are already in the 8th year of this recovery boom, bubble, whatever you want to term it, and that is already almost at record historical levels in terms of how long these booms tend to last before there is a sharp recession. So we are going to see a recession in the next year or two, and it's only a question of whether the people will be able to hang on or whether that will signal the end of the bubble.
We'll have more with James Corbett right after the break.
GEM International is a new diamond explorer in the richest diamond producing country in Africa, located next to the 4th largest producing diamond mine in the world. International spotlight is on an 1109 carat diamond recently discovered in Africa by a fellow Canadian junior with a proven operator and finance team. GEM International trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol GI. Visit us at gemdiamondmining.com.
I'm Larry Ray, President and CEO of American Manganese, Inc., listed on the TSX Venture, ticker symbol AMY, A-M-Y, with proprietary patents in the U.S., China, and South Africa. Our focus is on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. China recently legislated the responsibility for recycling onto their electric vehicle manufacturers and importers. For more information, please visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
Welcome back. We're speaking with James Corbett. James, the Japanese yen has hit a 6-week low. What has been the reaction by the Japanese government?
Well, the USD JPY has been on a bit of a roller coaster in the last several months, and I can attest to that myself, having watched that in my own account. So I know what's happening here, and it is interesting to watch that now we see USD JPY spiking as a result, most recently, of the now recently announced 20 trillion yen stimulus package that the Abe government has just announced. They were originally contemplating a 10 trillion yen stimulus package. They've just announced that they're going to double that to at least 20 trillion yen. That's 188 billion US dollars that they're going to spend in fiscal 2017, including on such things as infrastructure projects, but also to help fund companies to participate in construction and infrastructure projects overseas, which is an interesting use of stimulus money. They're also going to be spending 3 trillion yen of that on extending the new magnetically levitated train line that they're building from Tokyo to Nagoya. They're going to extend that to Osaka. So we're going to see some of that filtering down that way, but basically they're going to rain money from heaven yet again. And so this has caused the spike in the USD JPY, at least in the last 24 hours or so. It is interesting to watch the market reaction to this and how long I think enthusiasm over this idea will last, because we are now in the era of the stimulus economy where every major spike in markets and market activity is predicated on money from governments and central banks. And unfortunately, it becomes the spiked punch bowl phenomenon where that high that you get from the spiking of the punch bowl lasts less and less each time. So it will be interesting to watch how long enthusiasm for this stimulus package will last here in Japan.
Well, Canada has just rolled out its new child welfare plan where parents who make $30,000 a year or less will get basically $12,000 a year to look after kids tax-free. If you make more than $100,000, they'll not give you any money at all. So that's a direct stimulus program, and they say it's going to take, 70,000 kids out of poverty, but will the parents just go and spend the money on something else?
Beer and popcorn, I believe, was the phrase that
Jean Chrétien used. Yes,
a previous election cycle. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's always the question. I guess it depends how the money is handed out, and of course, you can't necessarily, if it is simply put in people's bank accounts, you can't control what's going to happen with that. But I mean, I think that, again, that's something that will be looked at more closely, or should be looked at more closely, perhaps, in places like Japan that are at or near the bottom of the list when it comes to fertility rates and looking to encourage more people to have children. Of course, one of the big concerns, not only here in Japan, but really everywhere around the world, is it is too expensive. We can't afford to have more children. So that is, in a sense, it's a government social engineering package to help encourage people to have more children. We'll see if that actually has that effect in Canada, but it is interesting to watch that idea take off, and we'll see how or if or when that does start to spread to other countries.
China's economy, how's it going right now?
It is not as good as the Chinese government is saying, but then again, it never really is. The Chinese government reported on Friday that second quarter growth was 6.7% year on year, which was slightly slower than expected, but about in line with what was reported for the first quarter. But even the official data showed that the weakness in exports and slow investment would continue in the coming months. But of course, those figures have to be taken, as always, with all Chinese government figures, with a gigantic grain of salt. And the China Sales Manager Index that was just published by World Economics on Tuesday showed that there was a slight increase in July from June of 51.7 on the index, meaning that there is actual growth going on in the manufacturing sector, but it was less than expected and less than what would be in line with what the Chinese government is reporting. So they're saying that it shows that growth is in fact about half of what the Chinese government is saying, or about 3.5%.
The Chinese media is now warning its viewers and listeners that perhaps Vancouver's real estate market should be avoided because it's in a big bubble.
Yes, and I think that that should be obvious to people who are actually living through that bubble. But in case they aren't, we can get that from a number of different sources. I note that Global BC News Morning was talking recently to Mark Cohodes, who was formerly ran one of the largest hedge funds on Wall Street. He was saying that there's no doubt that property prices in Vancouver are red hot, but also no doubt that they are a bubble and that it will burst at some point. And I think everyone sees that. It's just a question of when that will happen. So if Chinese and overseas investors who are, of course, driving this bubble start to get that message, I think we could see that bubble deflating a lot more quickly than would otherwise happen.
Do you think they would be quick to sell their Vancouver properties to cover any losses they might suffer in the Chinese economic environment?
That's certainly a possibility, but I think we have to keep in mind that, even as Mark Cohodes pointed out, this is fundamentally a money laundering operation for a lot of these overseas investors, especially for Chinese who are looking for a way to get around the capital controls and get over those hurdles in terms of how much money they're officially allowed to send out of China each year. Investing in Vancouver real estate has become one of those sinkholes. So to some extent, the property market depends on how tightly China turns those screws, how much they crack down on the ability of people to launder money through these types of operations. And secondly, it also, of course, the other side of that equation is how much China is devaluing the yuan. Obviously, the more they devalue the yuan, the more people want to get that money out of China and into a foreign market in a foreign currency. So we do see that obviously China is on the devaluation track right now. It is not a stunning or precipitous devaluation, but it is. They are slowly devaluing the yuan, so there is pressure for people to get the money out there. And right now, there's still signs that that spigot is not being closed down too tightly by the Chinese government. So we could conceivably see this continuing as it has been for at least the near-term future. But we'll have to see what happens if and when China starts to do a dramatic devaluation, because I think that's when they would be particularly concerned about capital outflows and really start cracking down on the ability of investors to buy property in Vancouver.
Would those investors feel okay if they lost 15, 20% as long as they got the cash value out of that house?
That's a potential. Yes, absolutely. Potentially, that's one thing that would be important. I think the important thing is to get the money out and into the foreign markets, and then what happens with that, as long as they can keep it circulating in China, Canadian bank accounts or what have you, I think would probably be the important part of this. Again, these are not people who are buying houses for the house themselves. They're buying it simply as a way to get money out of the country. So I don't think they particularly care about the property. They just want to make sure that the money is circulating in a foreign country.
The BC government has just given Vancouver permission to drop a bylaw that would put a special tax on vacant homes. Would that discourage people in China from buying homes here?
It would at least be a disincentive, and I think that it would have to be tailored to see how much of a disincentive would actually affect that investment decision, and maybe they would try to find a different market to invest in if that tax was sufficiently high.
And I've also heard that a lot of Chinese investors plan to flip the Vancouver property and then reinvest that money in the U.S.
Yes, I think that's perfectly plausible. Again, I think once the money leaves China and is in that foreign market in a foreign currency, then the ultimate ideal would be to try to get that in U.S. dollars, of course, which is really the international currency. So I could certainly see that happening. And if that starts a stampede of people trying to sell to try to get the money out, the most money that they can out before the bubble bursts, then that's the type of thing that usually causes the bubble to burst.
James, thank you so much for chatting with us.
Thank you very much for having me.
My guest has been James Corbett, publisher of thecorbettreport.com and editorial writer for the International Forecaster. He was speaking to us from Japan. You're listening to HowStreet.com radio. Find us on Twitter at TalkDigitalNet. Our popular YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. Questions for the show can be sent to info@HowStreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.